What do celestial bodies, Amazon parodies, and an absurd quantity of weapons and explosives have in common? Well, one thing. Mr. Sun's Hatbox, which just so happens to be the game I got sent a press key, sadly just after it released, but on the plus side, it did end up being an enjoyable, albeit short experience. Though as usual, it does come with some pros and some cons. Probably the biggest con, oddly enough, is the length. It is fairly short, at least if you focus on just progressing to the end of the main story. Though this is at least countered by the fact that there is more to this game than just the story itself, since you have multiplayer, PvP, and even a new game plus that adds to the overall difficulty, in addition to adding the need to pay rent to your underground operations. So while you will probably get to the end in under about 5 hours, there will still be plenty more to do if you're having fun with the game and want to keep pushing through and growing your army of interesting fellows collecting hats and weaponry to take over the world, or, well, at least return packages to their rightful owners. This is all because the focus is on the gameplay, and the story itself is kept fairly simple and focused on its theme to avoid distraction from it, since the entirety of the story is you're a delivery driver who is delivering a package to Mr. Sun's hat store, where it is subsequently taken by Mr. Moon and his thugs. As a highly trained and determined individual, you will get that package back, regardless of how many other hats you must find, how many bodies must litter the floor between you and this objective, and how many explosives you must set off. Now, since the focus is the gameplay, there is actually a decent number of layers to the game that result in a word salad genre list, while still being simple and digestible. It's a roguelite, base builder, platformer with optional stealth elements. For the roguelite aspect, you have a simple fact that your character dies on a mission, they're gone for good. This won't end your game, but it will make you sad you lose your highly trained character due to a mishap that results in you having to play as, well, the B team in your next mission. The base building aspect will remind you a bit of XCOM, and it even has character events, such as characters getting kidnapped, resulting in you needing to go rescue them to keep your base fully staffed. Generally speaking, there is not a lot of freedom when it comes to the order you build parts of your base in, since until the very end, you'll have plenty of room to build things as they unlock. The only real decisions you're going to have here happen at the final stretch of the first playthrough whenever you have less slots than building options. How the buildings work, though, varies building to building, with some just being basic functions such as storage, shops, mission lists, and character idling space, others being functional machinery where you can convert enemies to allies, mend the wounds on your characters, and modify their traits and stats later on. And the final type being the staffed rooms that you expand functionality of by assigning more and higher level characters to them so you can research better gear, upgrade more things, and even produce side income. The bulk of what you're going to be doing, though, is the platformer aspect, with an interestingly odd number of nods to other games. Snagging balloons to kidnap potential future minions, as well as extract items you want to keep, or even with a future upgrade you can extract yourself. The combat is fairly flexible as well, with stealthy options like silenced pistols or decoys or whoopee cushions, various melee options including head stomps provided the target doesn't have an offensive helmet, or you could just smack them with an axe, or shoot them with a grenade launcher, and the enemies have all these options for dealing with you, too. There's also some quirky joke items, and also items with unexpected behavior, like the camera item that literally takes screenshots that saves to your desktop, poo hats that attract flies that make you able to be noticed by smell, various slippery items like bars of soap that will send you flying and losing your hats and weapons. The game does not take itself super seriously with this stuff, which is a good thing, it fits the aesthetic. Though you'd probably have picked that up with your initial group of characters, since you'll often have a character that starts off with at least one silly negative trait. Speaking of characters, there's actually a fairly decent variety of base character types, each with different perks. Despite the fact that you start with fairly vanilla human base, you can get everything from skeletons to animals and even characters that explode on death. Heck, you can even kidnap the game's end boss if you really want to. So, covering a healthy mix of options is pretty easy to do. Now, at low levels, most of these characters will have all or mostly negative traits, though these will go away as you do more missions with them and level them up. So as long as a character is playable, it can be pretty worthwhile to level them up a bit to see if you can get lucky and get rid of those negative traits while getting some positives. And even if the negatives don't go away, that's a higher level character for research and such. In terms of level design, for the most part they're fine. The procedural generation is pretty solid. Only every now and then did I get a really nasty or unfair spawn where it put a bunch of enemies on top of each other or injected a tricky jump. But these were the exceptions, not the rules, and they never really bothered me too much short of sometimes losing a character I really liked. There is one exception though. the cloud zone infuriated me because it's the only zone where you can drop off the edge and permanently die. And I got more than a few spawns with a ton of ice slicks everywhere that shot my happy ass right off the edge of the map to my doom. Now, going into missions early on, you have one try and you're done, with the option to bring your own hat and weapon along the way. Though usually I preferred going in without gear until I had a decent stock of guns, and rarely ever brought my own hats until the final mission. And later on, if you're going into a tough area, I'm glad they eventually introduced reinforcements later in the story. That way you have at least backup to deal with tougher missions instead of being limited to the one character, one attempt rule. Now, the main reason I tended to avoid bringing a lot of my backstock of hats and weapons with me is that they're actually used in a number of upgrades in your research lab, as well as a number of them being worth a pretty penny for being sold through your base functions, so they can be somewhat important for keeping that cash flow flowing. On the first playthrough, it will be pretty difficult to fail so hard that you lose all your troops. But even if you do, home base will send over an intern, a low-level, just garbage character to get the job done, and hopefully it will get you through a mission so you can get some more resources and build your army back up. Though there are so many sources of new units, you probably will never see this happen, especially since you will still want a small army to sustain your buildings by mid-game. Overall, the game is short, and as such, so is this review. But I definitely had plenty of fun with Mr. Sun's Hatbox. I can see myself playing even more of it off camera, and if you can find it for sale at a price that you can justify for a solid, lighthearted weekend of gaming, or to play with a group of friends, it's something worth thinking about picking up. Though it oddly has a feeling of a game we're likely to see in some bundles within the next year or so, as sort of the hidden gem to push up that bundle's value.